Hey everybody, this is Kevin in an episode of Lazy Literature. In this episode, I'm going to review and recommend that you read Pillars of the Earth from Ken Follett. This is the first book in the Kingsbridge Trilogy. And ironically enough, in this review and recommendation, while I recommend Pillars of the Earth for your reading, I do not recommend that you finish the Kingsbridge trilogy unless you absolutely feel like you have to. Or if you just fall in love with the writing and you want to see it all the way through to the end. I think you should read Pillars of the Earth because it is original and creative in the way that Ken Follett tells this big, grand story while incorporating historical facts and elements in his narrative. A World Without End and the final book in the trilogy, A Column of Fire, they take this originality and creativity and just beat it to death. So they're not that original. And the final two books aren't that creative because it's like you get the same characters, but they just have different names in these new books. And you track the plot from the exposition to the final conclusion and everything wraps up. And it's like Ken Follett has told the exact same plot two more times, but he changes up the locations and he slightly plays with the motivations and characteristics of his characters. Now, Pillars of the Earth, it is wildly entertaining because it reads like a historically factual and correct soap opera. Ken Follett has written a trilogy of books focusing on the Middle Ages in Western Europe. We're thinking mainly about England, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and then he also includes a few other countries, places, and people. And what I like so much about Ken Follett making the medieval ages into a soap opera is that sometimes he takes historical figures, people that we know were absolutely alive, and he kind of plays with them a little bit. It's like we have the opportunity to see inside the mind and motivation of people like Guy Fawkes. Yeah, wasn't expecting that one. You'll have to read more to find out. You could also read into the mind and motivation of Mary, Queen of Scots. You can read into the mind and motivation of various popes in the Vatican, and the list can go on and on. So in this sense, the Kingsbridge trilogy, it is one of those fun type of trilogies of writing that are technically fiction, but they play with that boundary by incorporating historical figures to where they might be creative nonfiction. I wouldn't say that they are necessarily creative nonfiction because they don't tell you too much from the perspective of these historical figures, but they're still included as secondary characters. You should read Pillars of the Earth if you like a fast plot that incorporates a lot of sex, violence, and graphic detail. I understand some of these details are absolutely representative of what people had to live through during these times, especially if you were a woman, especially if you were a homosexual, and then later on in the trilogy, especially if you identify as either a Protestant or a Catholic. These reflect historical fact about what we know for these people during these time periods, and Ken Follett indulges in the graphic details. Some of the moments were a bit much for me as a 27-year-old boy. Maybe you're a little bit more jaded and hardcore and you're into that, but I think it's a fair warning to know what you're getting into. And everybody, overall, this is kind of this overall fun feeling that I get from reading these books. I understand this phrase, or description might be a little negative, but these are awesome airplane books, or books that you buy to read on a bus or a train, just some trip that you might be taking to where you want to read, but you don't want to stress yourself out too much. You don't want the reading to be too difficult. So you read the Kingsbridge Trilogy by Ken Follett. You should read Pillars of the Earth, World Without End, A Column of Fire. It's basically the same book 2 more times. And if you want to finish the trilogy, more power to you. All reading is good reading. If you want to search for something else, maybe something else by Ken Follett, I would highly recommend doing so. Also, final note, everybody, I just feel like this has to be pointed out about the final novel of this trilogy. A Column of Fire is the very first novel in this trilogy where Ken Follett tries to incorporate characters of color, and as a result, his language becomes noticeably more racial. And I'm kind of wondering why he decided to go this route. When you take a look at the time period that's being represented in this final novel, it absolutely makes sense that you have to address people of color, and as they go through slavery, as we transport people as objects and commodities in the early days of the medieval ages. I'm saying we as a white guy, trying to take responsibility for that. But I just don't read into the racial language that Ken Follett uses and get a good feeling of it. I feel like he overly simplifies some of the characters of color, and they're not as dynamic as the white characters, to just go ahead and to be honest with you. And I think it's problematic, and it's kind of detached from reality, because while I understand that you have to include characters of color, you have to do so without reducing them into caricatures. They still have to try and represent real people if we were to talk to them as real people in this life that we share together. It was unsettling and it caught me off guard. This type of racial language isn't present in Pillars of the Earth or the second book in the trilogy, World Without End, but at the same time, in a big picture, these books aren't that great in that regard because they just don't have characters of color. And, Ken Follett, he's writing about the Middle Ages, medieval time in England, France, and Western Europe. But, he could have addressed these characters earlier in his works. So when he gets to it in his third novel of the trilogy, it's not such a slap to the face. And it's not so surprising. So again, I recommend everybody should read 1989's Pillars of the Earth, all 1,000 pages of it. If you have the time, if you have the motivation to read World Without End or A Column of Fire, more power to you. You should absolutely do so. I would put them off to the side and I would find something else to read. You'll get additional reading recommendations in next week's video. If you're reading anything good right now, go ahead, let me know. If you want to like and subscribe, I appreciate that, because as a public school teacher for 8th grade currently, I'm trying to make some money off of this. This is how I am going to become a millionaire. So go ahead and click like and subscribe, everybody. Thank you for watching.